On the night the moon took on a scarlet hue, all the elders in the coastal village knew something was wrong. They had gathered near the shoreline to observe it rise beyond the ocean's horizon, its radiance tinged with a foreboding glow. Scraps of conversation floated through the evening air, laced with dread and apprehension. Some whispered old warnings about the serpent that lurked beyond the edge of sight, waiting for a chance to devour the very light of the sky. Others insisted that their chanting and prayers, passed down from their ancestors, would be enough to ward off such evil. Yet somehow the moon looked different this time, like a cursed pearl about to roll off its string and into the waiting maw of the unseen monster. Their anxieties were validated by old tales. When the moon ran red, it was a sign. Stricken by unknown forces, lunar gods would retreat, leaving the celestial orb susceptible to corruption or curse. This night, a creeping sense of doom felt thicker than the coastal mist clinging to the villagers' ankles. They huddled around small bonfires, draped in shawls to ward off the chill, eyes fixed on the sky as if it might crumble at any moment. The older ones instinctively reached for their handcrafted instruments, bronze gongs and bamboo drums, poised to make a clamour at the slightest sign the gigantic serpent might appear. In the centre of the gathering stood Tala, a woman of unwavering composure, her hair pinned back with pearl-encrusted combs passed down from her mother's mother. She was neither the youngest nor the oldest in the community, but her spirit held the fierce determination of youth, tempered by the wisdom of age. She was a storyteller at heart, having spent years weaving tales and songs from the threads of old legends. Though she had never seen the Bakunawa herself, she believed in its existence. Echoing deep within her memory was the voice of her grandmother, reminding her how the serpent once devoured a moon, long, long ago, swallowing night's only guiding light, until the people's voices and drums forced it to spit the luminescent orb back out. Yet tonight, her heart pounded with fresh fear. The omen was different. The moon's glow felt tarnished. A shadow roamed in the sky. The first sign of something truly amiss came when the entire surface of the water began to ripple. The waves, usually calm beneath the moonlight, churned as if some colossal creature stirred in the depths. People shouted and pointed, and Tala braced herself, moving closer to the shoreline. She peered at the sea, scanning the inky waters for any sign of that serpentine body. Dimly, beneath the reflection of the moon, she could almost make out the flicker of a silhouette, a scaled shape weaving through the currents. A hush fell over the crowd as they strained to detect what she saw. Breath hissed between fearful teeth. A few bold fishermen cast their lanterns out over the water, the wavering pools of light doing little more than deepening the shadows. Suddenly, an ear-splitting shriek split the night air. It was like no sound they had ever heard, resonant with the echoes of centuries of storms. Men clutched their chests, children stifled cries. Something ancient had awakened, and it wanted the cursed moon for itself. Instinctively, people clanged their gongs and beat their drums. Voices lifted in rhythmic chanting. The ruckus was meant to scare off the creature. Just as the elders had taught them, Tala set her jaw, her heart full of both adrenaline and despair. Perhaps the standard practice would prove ineffective against a fate that had already been set in motion. High above, the moon glowed sickly, as if suffering from an internal wound. A ring of darkness inched across it, not the typical lunar eclipse, but a stain that spread with baleful intent. Tala's teeth rattled from the force of her trembling, and she gripped her small kulintang stick so tightly that her knuckles grew white. Her mind raced with the portents of the old stories. A time would come when the Bakunawa would not merely swallow the moon whole, but drain its essence entirely, plunging all life into a never-ending darkness. And the only hope of saving the world would lie in unveiling the truth of the serpent's hunger and the curse laid upon the moon. A frantic voice rose above the mayhem, calling Tala's name. She turned to see her childhood friend Mahalika, a seasoned fisherman who had guided many a voyage across these waters. He gasped for breath as he stumbled through the crowd. Blood stained his shirt, though Tala couldn't tell if it was his own or someone else's. "Tala," he managed between coughs. "We tried. We took out our biggest drums on the boat and beat them until our arms went numb. It's not working. The serpent isn't backing off." "Oh, what can we do?" Tala asked, pressing a cloth against a gash on his forearm. "The elders are insisting we keep making noise, but the darkness is spreading." Mahalika grimaced. "This is no ordinary threat. We saw something out there in the water. The serpent is not only swallowing the moonlight, it's devouring the moon's spirit. We must find a way to lift the curse. Otherwise, no matter how loud we are, it'll keep devouring until nothing's left." The notion of a cursed moon made Tala's limbs go cold. She dropped her gaze to the ground, recalling a snippet of lore she had once nearly dismissed. The legend told of a malicious enchantment placed on one of the 7 moons by a vengeful deity, enraged at the people who had turned away from his worship. In punishment, he poisoned that moon so that if ever the Bakunawa came to devour it, darkness would be unleashed upon the mortal world. But the tale was considered so old and obscure that few believed it held any truth. Now, with the moon's ominous transformation overhead, Tala felt the stinging realization that legends often carried a kernel of historical reality. She steadied Maharalika and guided him to a low wooden bench near a fire, rummaging for healing herbs as she asked, "Did you see any sign of how we might break this curse? Is there a way to weaken it?" He winced while she applied a poultice to his wound. "We saw shapes in the sky, like shadows of birds, or maybe a swang. I'm not sure if they're illusions or real, but I remember an old saying from the stories, that if the moon itself were cursed, the gods might intervene if someone of pure intent could offer a precious gift or sacrifice, something that resonates with the essence of light." Tala's thoughts raced. She glanced at the silver combs in her hair, the pearl inlays shimmering dully against the fires. They were relics from a time when her ancestors claimed to be blessed by the goddess of the moon. If the serpent had become this powerful under the influence of the curse, perhaps those items carried some form of protective magic that could still safeguard the moon, or coax the Bakunawa into releasing its prey. But she shuddered at the thought of approaching the monstrous serpent directly. No one had ever come close to the Bakunawa and lived to tell the tale, and even if they had, the cursed moon seemed unstoppable in its path toward total darkness. As dawn approached, a thin line of light attempted to break the bleak horizon. But the moon still hung in the sky, overshadowed almost entirely by that inky stain. It refused to retreat below the horizon like a normal lunar cycle. Instead, it lingered, as though paralyzed by some unfamiliar force. The entire village had become enveloped in an unnatural twilight that oppressed the spirit. Birds hesitated to greet the new day, and roosters crowed in confusion. Only the perpetual pounding of the villagers' drums provided any sense of movement in the air. Gathering her courage, Tala approached the circle of elders seated around the largest bonfire. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their voices were nearly spent from continuous chanting. She knelt, lowering her head in respect, then spoke. "Elders, your chanting keeps the serpent from entirely consuming the moon, but the curse is defeating our efforts. We must try something else, or at least we must try more." "Our resources are limited," one of the elders rasped. "The old ways tell us to make noise until the Bakunawa yields. But there is more to this. We sense the moon has been tainted, and that changes the nature of our defense." Tala drew a fortifying breath. "I have the combs from my grandmother. She always told me they were blessed by Halia, the guardian goddess of the moon. I'm hesitant to presume any special power in them, but we cannot overlook ancestral gifts. Perhaps I should sail out and confront the serpent directly." An immediate protest rose from nearly everyone around the fire. "Foolishness!" barked one. "Certain death!" cried another. "Our hearts cannot endure losing another soul," murmured a third. But Tala heard an undercurrent of desperate hope. Their condemnation was shot through with longing for a solution, any solution. Despite their warnings, no one offered a better alternative. The world was dimming, crops would wither, night predators would roam, endless fear would cripple everything if the moon were truly swallowed, and the sun eventually lost its counterpart in the sky. Mythology, freshly bandaged, limped forward. I will go with her. My boat is sturdy, and I know these waters better than any man. I will guide her to the serpent's den. A hush closed in. Finally, the eldest among them nodded, though sorrow weighed down his gaze. Go then, children of this village, but know that your bravery may demand a great price. We will continue to chant and roar our defiance from here. You must be our spear, striking at the heart of darkness. At the break of what should have been morning, though no true daylight could permeate the gloom, Tala and Mythology climbed into his fishing vessel. They stowed a few torches, the largest drums they could carry, and a small bundle of offerings culled from the villagers, pearls, shells, and carved talismans. The rhythmic chanting from the shore receded as they pushed off. All noise and safety seemed to dissolve into the swirling black tide, leaving only the sound of water slapping against the hull and the echo of their own anxious breathing. The sky was a grey void, where the sun struggled to peek through. Above, the moon hung like a wounded creature, half absorbed by shadow. A monstrous silhouette coiled in front of it, occasionally visible through swirling cloud scales, glowing with stolen luminescence. The Bakunawa's presence radiated such malevolence that Tala's chest tightened as if a phantom hand squeezed her lungs. She clutched her grandmother's combs for comfort, suspecting that if they truly bore any flicker of divine protection, this was the moment she would need it most. They sailed beyond the coastal shallows, where waves grew rough and unpredictable. Still, Mythology's experienced hands navigated with deft skill, yet progress felt excruciatingly slow, and the air smelled of brine and rot, as if the ocean itself had soured. Suddenly, a massive tail emerged from the water, scales like black obsidian studded with starlight reflections. It smashed down onto the surface, sending a spray of water over the boat. Tala shrieked, shielding her face as the vessel rocked wildly. Mythology dug his paddle deep, straining to keep them from capsizing. It was then that they heard the serpents roar up close, a deep, resonant sound, echoing with otherworldly tones. The water beneath them rumbled. Once their boat righted, Tala grabbed a drum and pounded out a frantic rhythm, the noise reverberating across the waves. For a moment, the serpentine head emerged, dimly lit by the cursed moon's wan glow. Its eyes glowed a feast crimson, like fiery coals longing to devour more light. Then, just as quickly, the creature submerged, replaced by the swirl of an immense shadow beneath the foam. I don't think the noise alone will dissuade it, Mythology said, breathless from the close call. We might have to lure it somehow, or come close enough to... His voice broke off as the serpent burst upward, unveiling its full, terrifying form, an immense serpent dragon with a barbed crest at the back of its skull and a mouth large enough to swallow houses whole. Water cascaded off its gleaming scales, which shimmered a dark bluish green in the meager light. Tala found herself trembling uncontrollably. In the terrifying glow, she remembered the stories of how the Bakunawa had once been a divine creature who fell from grace, smitten by its own hunger for the moon's light. Now it was unstoppable, a swirling force of cosmic appetite. In a sudden, desperate maneuver, Mythology flung a rope with a hook, hoping to snare one of the monstrous horns. But the creature's thrash was too powerful. It snapped the rope as if it were thread, and Mythology staggered backward from the recoil. Tala took her moment. She raised the silver combs skyward, their pearls barely visible in the gloom. A trembling prayer rose from her lips, invoking Halia, pleading with the goddess to remember her lineage and the vows she had once made to protect mortals from the Bakunawa's wrath. The serpent's head twisted toward her, as if recognizing the significance of the comb's faint glimmer. Its maw gaped in a silent snarl. A thunderous crack exploded across the heavens. For an instant, the cursed moon flared bright, illuminating the scene in a sickly silver-green radiance. The Bakunawa roared, more enraged than before. In that mercurial light, Tala glimpsed a portion of the serpent's flesh, near the crest of its neck, where the scales seemed to be affixed by tendrils of darkness rather than by natural growth. A patch of seething black energy pulsed there, as though the curse itself had tethered it. If the serpent was the instrument of the cursed moon's destruction, perhaps that was the key to stopping it. Summoning a courage that felt borrowed from legends, Tala shouted above the wind, "We must strike the source of the curse on its body. Mahalika, get me close enough to use this blade." She gestured at a short sword sheathed at her waist, the only real weapon she had brought besides the drum and her faith. He looked at her as if she were mad. "Close enough to strike the serpent? We won't survive that." "We have no choice," she cried over another deafening roar. The sky seemed to tremble as the moon retreated further behind the serpent's form. Screams sounded in the distance, whether from the villagers or from illusions conjured by the serpentine monstrosity, Tala could not tell. Mahalika nodded grimly, steering the boat forward despite the chaos. The closer they came, the more the serpent's aura of malevolence pressed on them, like a weight threatening to crush their hearts. The black waves hammered the boat, but Mahalayika deftly maneuvered them alongside one of the creature's colossal coils. Tala crawled onto the prow, sword in hand, combs tucked into a small pouch around her neck. The Bakunawa turned its gargantuan head at the last moment, sensing her approach. With an ear-splitting hiss, it snapped its jaws just inches from the prow, splintering part of the vessel's side. Tala nearly lost her balance, but Mahalika swung the boat around in a desperate swirl. She seized the chance, lunging and slashing at the black tendrils along the serpent's neck. Her blade made contact with the cursed patch of scales, and a gout of dark fire erupted from the wound. An unearthly shriek tore from the wound throat, shaking the air so violently that Tala and Mahalika were thrown to the deck. The serpent convulsed, diving below the surface in agony. At first, Tala believed they had succeeded, because the moon began to glow a bit brighter. But there was no time to celebrate. In a fury, the serpent re-emerged, body twisting around the boat, jaws wide. It released another chilling roar, brimming with wrathful energy. Tala lifted her blade again, but the cursed darkness around the serpent sealed the gash with horrifying speed. Even so, she noticed a fraction of the curse dissolving. If they could inflict enough strikes on that patch or strip away what bound the Bakunawa to the moon's corruption, they might set the moon free. The next moments were a blur of frantic motion. Mahala called upon his courage, beating the drum with one hand to disorient the creature while steering with the other to keep them from being slammed by the serpent's tail. Tala lunged again, heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. She muttered her pleas to Halia, pressing the silver combs to the blade. A faint shimmer of divine light glided along the sword's edge. She thrust hard at the coiling darkness that seethed at the serpent's neck. It screamed once more, and thick rivulets of black energy seeped into the water. As the serpent thrashed, its massive tail crashed into the side of the boat, sending Matelika tumbling into the churn. Tala froze in horror, the world seeming to slow. "Mahalika," she screamed. Fear for his life immediately overtook all else. Though the serpent still writhed, she dashed to the side of the boat and reached out. His hand struggled above the water, and she seized it, gritting her teeth to hoist him aboard. Struggling with all her might, she pulled Mahalika back onto the deck. He coughed violently, chest heaving. "We almost have it," he shouted, spitting out seawater, though his eyes were wild with the terror of nearly drowning. Behind them, the serpent heaved again, the patch of darkness on its body thinning further. Chunks of cursed scale chipped away, and for an instant Tala thought she saw a shimmering glow beneath, as though the Bakunawa's true flesh longed to be freed from the black intensement. But the serpent's eyes still burned with malevolent intensity, fixated on the moon overhead. Despite its injuries, it opened its jaws wide, making to clamp down on the lunar orb in one final, cataclysmic gulp. Tala's voice echoed across the endless sea. "No, I won't let you!" Summoning the last vestiges of her strength, she grasped the silver combs and held them toward the moon. A pale luminescence clung to the pearls, dancing like fireflies around her fingers. She extended the combs toward the serpent, as if brandishing a talisman. "Remember the vow you once swore?" she cried. It was said that long ago, the Bakunawa had loved the moons, enamored by their beauty, the celestial ladies of the sky. Perhaps, beneath the layers of curses and darkness, that love might still exist. For a fleeting breath, time seemed to stand still. Then, from the combs erupted a shimmering beam of light. It wasn't grand or overwhelming, just a gentle, silvery glow, akin to moonlight reflected on a lake. Still, it pulsed with sincere devotion, a silent prayer to the goddess. The beam connected with the serpent's wound, searing away remnants of cursed scales. The Bakunawa's eyes widened in a mixture of rage, pain, and perhaps recognition. A howl reverberated across the sky, and the serpent hurled itself backward, twisting in a violent spasm that churned the ocean into froth. In its agony, the Bakunawa's jaws parted, releasing a dark mist that slithered upward, halting its attempt to swallow the moon. Immediately, the moon's pallor shifted, its bloody hue softened, and a gentle white light began to emerge from within. The unstoppable eclipse that once threatened to plunge everything into permanent darkness slowly receded. "Look!" Maharelika gasped, pointing overhead. The moon's surface shone anew. Each second more of its original gleam returned, pushing away the shadow. The serpent shrieked again, this time less a roar of malign fury and more a cry of confusion. Dark wisps peeled away from its scaly hide, dissolving into the air. Then, in a swirl of brine, the Bakunawa dove hastily into the depths, as if desperate to remove itself from the silver radiance that had once enthralled it. Tala collapsed to her knees on the boat's sodden deck, tears slipping down her cheeks. Maharelika crouched beside her, panting. Their boat bobbed forlornly in a calmer sea, battered but still afloat. Above them, the moon glowed with a renewed purity, as though cleansed of any malicious tinge. Slowly, the approaches of dawn began to seep into the sky, streaks of rosy gold edging the darkness away, and from the shore, a distant roar of jubilation rang out, growing louder and louder until Tala and Maharelika realized it was the villagers cheering. Hope had returned to the world. The sun would rise again, and the night, when it came, would do so under the watch of a moon that was no longer defiled. Once ashore, the villagers swarmed the returning heroes. The elders' voices cracked with relief as they hugged Tala and Maharelika, praising their courage. Over the next hours, fires were lit all along the coastline, not out of fear, but as a sign of gratitude. The drums, the gongs, and the chanting took on a new rhythm. A song of thanksgiving to the goddess, and to the once proud serpent, who had, in some corner of its being, remembered the beauty of the moon. Tala offered the silver combs to the village altar that evening. Though part of her wished to keep them, she believed their energy deserved a sacred place where all could gather and remember this day. The elders placed them reverently alongside a carved depiction of the moon goddess. "May the light of our prayers serve as a warning to any darkness that should dare attempt to consume the sky again," the head elder proclaimed. Maharelika, arms still bandaged, stood beside Tala. A warmth stirred within her chest as she surveyed the villagers' smiling faces, illuminated by torches and moonlight. Children played at the water's edge, no longer fearful of the shadows. The sea itself seemed gentler, its waves kissed by the moon's reflection. Yet, despite the renewed peace, Tala couldn't help gazing at the horizon. her mind returning to the giant serpent that had taken refuge in the ocean's depths. She wondered if the Bakunawa would heal, and if the memory of its ancient love for the moon might one day resurface without malevolence. Perhaps it would remain a monster in some people's eyes, an embodiment of cosmic hunger. But Tala had felt, for just a heartbeat, a flicker of something else, a longing and despair that had overshadowed its soul. She secretly hoped that in the newfound tranquility, the Bakunawa might someday find its own redemption. And now, the skies were calm. Stars twinkled in their usual melodies, and the moon shone clearly, unsullied by curses or illusions. Drums and laughter continued late into the evening, a collective exhalation of relief at having weathered a storm that threatened eternal night. And while the future remained uncertain, night after night, the villagers would look heavenward and remember how the moon was once snatched from them by a nightmare eclipse, only to be returned by the power of perseverance, faith, and the vestiges of an ancient kindness lurking beneath a monstrous exterior.